going to we'll get started. Okay, if everyone will please rise, we'll start off with the Negro National Anthem.
Fred Burrell.
Y'all may be seated. Good afternoon. I am Judge Tamika Carter, the Local Administrative District Judge here for our courts and the presiding judge of the 400 District Court. It is my pleasure to welcome you this afternoon to Navigating African American Voting Rights Through History. First, there are several people that I need to thank who made this day possible. The National Archives, Fort Bend Black Heritage Society, Fort Bend History Museum, Past Mayor Carolyn Jones, Ms. Hope Salmon, Mr. Rothman Ward, Reverend Curtis Lucas, County George K.P. George, and his staff who are essential for helping us pull this together today, Ms. Tammy Frazier, Shanika Smith, and Ryan Dunsmore, and of course the Judiciary for hosting this program, and all of you you for taking time out of your Friday afternoon to join us today to discuss this very important topic. We know the right to vote and have a voice in electing the individuals who will make decisions which impact our lives is essential to an American democracy and really any free society. But we also know that this right was not always afforded to Black Americans in this country, although they were citizens. We know that the fight to gain equal rights was a long and often painful battle. I would like to take a moment of silence to honor the individuals who dedicated their lives and sometimes sacrificed their life for this fight. Please join me in a moment of silence. And while your eyes remain closed, please reflect on this. Recall the names of local civil rights activist Willie Melton and Arizona Fleming, who challenged all-white primaries, an all-white primary here in Fort Bend County in the 1950s. If you recall the brutality that was going on in the 50s and 60s, recall how much courage that must have taken, because how dangerous that was to speak out on those kind of topics during that time period. And we honor our national heroes, Fannie Lou Hamer, who was jailed and brutally beaten, also by law enforcement officers, for daring to register individuals and exercise her right to vote. Recall Medgar Evers, a World War II veteran who was gunned down in his driveway, beat from his wife and children, simply because he attempted to register Black Americans to vote, to exercise the right that should have been granted them in our Constitution. Today, we will honor them all. Thank you. County Judge K.P. George, Bishop.
Thank you, Judge Carter. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this Black History Month celebration presented by esteemed the Fort Bend County Judiciary and, of course, my office. Today, we embark on a journey through archives of history, exploring the struggles and triumphs of African American voting rights in Fort Bend County. That history is very, very long and a lot to talk about, a lot to learn. As we come together here, it is more than just a commemoration. It is a celebration of resilience, courage, and pursuit of justice. Through the lens of law and history, our judiciary leaders will guide us in few minutes, shedding lights on the struggles, triumphs, pivotal moments that have shaped the voting rights landscape for African American and all of us in the history of our county. And it is an honor and privilege to stand in before you amidst this esteemed gathering as we reflect on the progress made and all the challenges we are facing and the challenges ahead of us. And thank you for joining us this enlightening journey. Let's embrace the lessons of the past to inspire a future where every voice is heard and every vote counts. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Judge Stephen Watson, presiding judge of County Court at Law Number 5, and I will be your official mistress of ceremonies for this event. What you will learn today is the history of Fort Bend County, right here where you're seated. It's very significant. It's very significant history, not only for Texas, but for the United States. And interwoven in Fort Bend County's history is Black history. The year 1869, Congress passed the 15th Amendment. Section 1, the right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Section 2, the Congress shall have power to enforce this article by appropriate legislation. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the U.S. Constitution were considered the fulfillment of guarantees into full citizenship for African Americans. These laws were significant in reconstructing the South for the newly freed slaves. The Reconstruction era existed from 1866 to 1877, only 11 years. During this time, Fort Bend County was the second richest county in Texas, and one of 6 counties where the freed slaves outnumbered the whites. It is from that environment that the first Black elected official in the United States, Walter Moses Burton, was elected in 1869. He served the county as sheriff and tax assessor, and was later elected to the Texas Senate, where he served until 1883. In an effort to prevent Blacks from holding political offices, counties and local governments created barriers for the Black citizens to vote. Literacy tests were used discriminately on the newly freed slaves, and grandfather clauses excluded anyone whose ancestors had not voted in the 1860s. These devices were used to disenfranchise African Americans. They were written into laws of former Confederate states and in Fort Bend County. We're going to share with you some stories that we interviewed and talked to people in Fort Bend County who had ancestors, grandparents, family members who lived during some of these times. I'm going to call up now the former mayor of Kendleton, Texas, Ms. Carolyn Jones. If y'all know how to fix it.
Yeah, just
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. It's just a privilege and a pleasure to be able to stand before you and share in this historical moment. I am Carolyn Taylor Jones, born and raised in Fort Bend County, Kendleton, Texas. And the trail has been pretty much blazed by Judge Watson and all, talking about the history. On the program, they have me talking about practices and customs being raised up here in Fort Bend County and in Kendleton. But to go back a little bit, I have to go back a little bit in the history of Kendleton so I can fast forward to where we are today with our voting rights. But after slavery was abolished in 1865, the first settlers came in and bought up this land in Kendleton. They bought the land up, they organized the town and established it, and we had our own churches, our own school, and our own businesses, because being in Fort Bend County, the practices was at that time, we wasn't even thought of, we was thought of as second-class citizens in Fort Bend County. So the pioneers had to pretty much be established in our own town to have pretty much what we needed, because in rich Fort Bend County, whatever they gave us was scarce and few. So we had to be pretty much established on our own, and this is what our pioneers did. And I was sharing with Judge a land in Kendleton, and I was just amazed how back in the 1800s, that people signed their name and how they wrote, and all this was just very unique, you know? And so I keep this because it's a great reminder from which we come. That come in, as I said, second-class citizens. But to fast forward, I bought my book so I could share with you voting rights. Hamilton was pretty much instrumental in helping blacks here in Fort Bend County and some other counties to get the right to vote. And I was telling Judge Watson, when I started voting, I had to pay. I had to pay $1.50 to vote in Fort Bend County in this primary that I bought my book that we had to fight the jaybirds, they called them. The jaybirds was on trial. And so it was in this book. So some of this history is in this book where starting in the 1950s, we had a gentleman in Pendleton, which I brought some, tried to bring some visual aid. If who all don't know Mr. Milton, yes, you know, we have to have some visual aids with our history to pass down to our children, so they would know from whence they come and why they live in the good life they are living today. It's because somebody had to fight. And so in Pendleton, Mr. Milton, in the 50s, he said, you know, the custom and the practice of Fort Bend County and how they treat us, we're just not going to be second-class citizens. So he stepped out and he said, we're not going to be treated that way. And he joined up with the NAACP. And as they was talking about him and Miss Arizona Fleming, and the fight began. And the fight was very unique. And so by then, as they said earlier, I can show you where they was in Washington, D.C., standing on the steps of the justice system, where they was told, and it was one that the jaybirds in Fort Bend County, the people had violated our rights, our civil rights to vote. And so, like I said, the fight began. And I brought a little visual aid to show you that people don't believe, here they are, standing on the step. These people are the ones that went up along with the NAACP and fought. And now we have the right to vote. But during that process in the 50s and 60s, when the case was won, still their practices was, well, since you want to vote, we're going to make you pay. And so then we had to, even though we had the right to vote, but I had to pay $1.50. And now sometimes everybody didn't have it, but the ones that had it, we pulled together, not me, but we, you know, my forefathers, my foreparents pulled together and got that money for people so they could vote. And during that time in the process, it didn't only help Fort Bend County, it helped Matagorda County and some other counties to give the blacks the right to vote. But fast forward now, but the fight continues. Now we don't have to pay to vote. And so voting is really important. So we've come a long way with this fight that now we don't have to pay to vote. Some of the practices are still around, you know, and some of the customs, but we've come a long ways in that fight. So just wanted to share that because Pendleton, I still say, is very unique in Fort Bend County. We're a very historical town, and a lot of good things has come out of Pendleton that to help a lot of people everywhere else. So this is my story. A document signed in 1896, signed, you know, if you want to see it, it's a beautiful thing to have this, you know.
Thank
and to know.
Good afternoon. I am Monica Rawlins, presiding judge in 328 District Court. Carol Langford, and this is her recollection. I can remember going to the grocery store in Rosenberg, but had to go in through the back door. I remember going down to Cole Theater and having to go upstairs to sit. But if we wanted popcorn, we had to go downstairs and wait outside. My grandmother paid poll taxes to vote. She would pay that if she didn't pay for anything else. She talked about having to be forced to watch the hangings that took place in downtown Rosenberg. They didn't call it lynchings, they called it hangings. Many times the adults talked about things but didn't want the children to know, so they didn't go into details. Recollection of Carla Langsford.
Good afternoon, I'm Tamesia Glover. I'm the Associate Judge of the 400 District Court. And there were other Rosenberg residents who reflected on this dark time in our history. My family was afraid to vote. At first, they were hindered. They had to pay taxes in order to vote. And after they no longer had to pay taxes, they had free voting rights, and they made sure to vote. Recalls Mary Coleman Clark. I also remember it being a challenge for people of color to vote. They had to pay poll taxes, which most could not afford. When they didn't have to pay, they were just afraid to vote. Recalls Willie Mae Snell. My great aunt Eliza Harris, who was born in the 1800s, would talk about how the Negro was considered chattel or property. At first, they didn't have the right to vote. Once they did, they had to pay a poll tax, or was just outright kept from voting. Remembers Earlene Drayden. Lastly, Hope B. Franks Solomon reflects on a story from her grandfather. My grandfather, Freddie McEmbury, Buddy is what I call him, will tell stories about how he could remember when they had no rights to vote, male or female. Although Buddy could read and write, he could not afford to pay the poll taxes. I believe the Savinoka brothers may have helped him with the poll tax cost because they would allow him to charge groceries in their store. My grandfather always told me to vote because someone died for you to have that right.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaf, blood at the roots, black body swinging, the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar tree. Pastoral saints in the gallant south, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia sweet and fresh than the southern smell of burning flesh. Here is the fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the breeze to suck, for the sun to rise, for the trees to dry. Here is strange and bitter
We'll now hear from Attorney Taylor Armstrong regarding the law and the fight that came out of Fort Bend County.
How's everybody doing today? Good. All right. Firstly, I want to thank Judge Watson for allowing me to be here today. I grew up in Fort Bend County, and I must say, a lot of this stuff that I'm hearing, I was not privy to growing up. For whatever reason, I don't know, it wasn't taught in school or I wasn't paying attention. But a lot of these stories are really new to me. Even the stuff this week while we were discussing our presentations today, a lot of the things that I was researching myself was fairly new to me. So I do appreciate the opportunity to be here today and to discuss these matters with everybody. And I think things like this events are really good for the younger generation to understand where we come from. I was tasked with presenting Terry v. Adams. Does everybody know what Terry v. Adams is? Has anybody heard of it? Who has not heard of Terry v. Adams? Okay, good. So, interestingly enough, this case was one of the landmark cases in the milestones for the struggles of voter rights. Terry v. Adams played a crucial role in challenging racial discrimination in the electoral process. This case was decided in 1953 by the United States Supreme Court. It originated here in Fort Bend County. The case centered around the practice of Jaybird Democratic Association, a political organization in the county. The Jaybird Association conducted a discriminatory pre-primary election that excluded African American voters from the primary process. William J. Terry, an African American resident of Fort Bend County, challenged the constitutionality of the Jaybird Association's actions. Terry argued that the association's racial exclusionary practices violated his rights under the 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution, which prohibits the denial of voting rights based on race. In a landmark decision, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in favor of Terry. The court held that the Jaybird Association's actions violated the 15th Amendment, as they effectively disenfranchised African American voters from meaningful participation in the primary election. The decision struck a blow against the use of private organizations to circumvent constitutional protections of voting rights. This case marked a significant milestone in the struggle for voting rights and racial equality in the United States. It also set a precedent for future legal battles aimed at safeguarding the voting rights of all citizens, regardless of race. In conclusion, this case stands as a testament to the enduring importance of defending voting rights and combating racial discrimination in the electoral process. Thank you.
After the Terry v. Adams ruling, the victory over all white primaries, Barriers still existed for African American citizens to exercise their right to vote. This was done in the form of poll taxes, literary tests, and terror. We heard the term hanging, but it was lynching. African Americans were subjected to economic pressures, meaning their bosses would often fire them, particularly in the Jim Crow South, if they exercised their right to vote. And also physical threats of harm, like lynching. So what would you do? If exercising your right to vote meant that you would lose your job and possibly not be able to feed your family, or could risk worse, death, what would you do? Many African Americans in the Jim Crow South were faced with that very decision. Some are our grandparents, and we've heard the stories. Finally, in 1965, President Lyndon B. Johnson, a Southerner, urged Congress to pass legislation which would make it possible to thwart the 15th Amendment, insert the Voting Rights Act. President Johnson reminded Congress that we cannot have government for all people until we first make sure that government is of and by all people. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was extended in 1970, 1975, and 1982, abolishing some of these barriers to voting. But please know that even after the passage of this act, oftentimes federal supervision was often needed in order for individuals to exercise their right to vote. So yes, it was on the books, but in practice, African American citizens were still being threatened, and our government had to send federal troops to protect them. That's our history.
So, the next year after the Voting Rights Act passed, 1966, the state of Texas elected its first state senator since Reconstruction. Now, you remember we talked about Walter Moses Burton? He was elected up until 1883. The next state senator was elected in 1966. 83 years later, State Senator Barbara Jordan. Very significant. Barbara Jordan's father was a pastor of a church in Kendleton, and her roots are in Fort Bend County. Even more significant, we can clearly see the correlation with fair and equal access to elections and the opportunities for Black Americans to get elected, and that the laws must be enacted to support the fairness and access to voting. And embarking on this journey, people like Reverend Lucas shared a letter that his mother wrote in Louisiana, not Fort Bend County, after his family had crosses on their lawns and after they had been harassed trying to vote. She wrote this letter to the president and to the U.S. District Court trying to get access to voting. The Voting Rights Act was designed to protect just that type of behavior. At this time, will all the elected officials in Fort Bend County please stand to be recognized? Okay, I'm going to I will say your names. Okay, Judge Tamika Carter. Thank you. Judge Monica Rollins. Judge Judy Matthew. Judge Surendra Patel. Commissioner Precinct 2, Grady Preston. Our Fort Bend District Clerk, Beverly Walker. And our County Judge, KP George. Also, walking the hardest working man in Fort Bend and County and the surrounding Houston areas. Please stand up and be recognized. State Representative Thomas. The Voting Rights Act was essential to eliminating discrimination and providing equal protection and access to voting. After the Voting Rights Act, there were voter registration drives flourishing throughout the county. Hopi Solomon, one of the residents of Fort Bend County and Rosenberg, remembers people riding around with bullhorns, encouraging you to vote. Everyone happy, thrilled, families faithfully voting. Groups like the NAACP, LUMAC, churches, community-based organizations, everybody getting involved, everybody excited. They didn't have to pay a poll tax, the Voting Rights Act protected them, and they voted. Oh, what a day it was. And I heard it in their voices. And people said, and residents said, they voted faithfully from that day on. In 2013, however, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down a key provision of the Voting Rights Act involving federal oversight of voting in 9 southern states. You will hear from attorney Taylor Armstrong again about the case Shelby v. Holder. This case involved what some people call an elimination of key protections under the Voting Rights Act. After Attorney Armstrong, you will hear from none other than State Representative Ron Reynolds on where we are today, the legislation that has been passed, Senate Bill 1, and as recent as last week, federal court cases fought, this last one in San Antonio, regarding voting rights. Houston Urban League versus Greg Abbott. He will share with you in that case many of the voter access laws that were put into place, mobile voting, being able to give people water while voting, giving access more to ballot by mails as well as absentee ballots, are now being eliminated through the Texas legislature. You will hear that effort, and you will hear about voting today. Attorney Armstrong.
Shelby v. Holder. Shelby County v. Holder was decided in 2013. It originated from a challenge to Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This section determined which states and local governments were subject to pre-clearance requirements before making changes to their voting laws. The Voting Rights Act was a landmark piece of legislation aimed at combating racial discrimination in voting. It was particularly targeted at states with a history of voter suppression, mainly in the South. Section 4B of the Voting Rights Act established a formula for determining which jurisdictions were required to seek federal approval or pre-clearance for changes to their voting laws. This was based on their voting discriminatory history in their voting practices. Shelby County, Alabama challenged the constitutionality of Section 4B, arguing that it was outdated and no longer necessary. They contended that significant progress had been made in eliminating racial discrimination in voting. In a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled in favor of Shelby County. declaring Section 4B unconstitutional. The court argued the formula used to determine which jurisdictions were subject to pre-clearance was based on outdated data and therefore no longer valid. The immediate impact of Shelby's decision was the invalidation of the pre-clearance requirement. Without this provision, jurisdictions were no longer required to seek federal approval before changing their voting laws. The decision was met with significant controversy and criticism. Many argued that it undermined decades of progress in protecting voting rights, particularly for minority communities who are most vulnerable in voter suppression. Following the Shelby decision, several states enacted voter ID laws, gerrymandered districts, and implemented other measures to critique, or that critics argued disproportionately affected minority voters, especially African American voters. In conclusion, Shelby v. Holder was a landmark decision that significantly impacted voter rights in the United States. While the plea clearance provision was struck down, the broader conversation on protecting the right to vote remains crucial for upholding the principles of democracy and equality. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm so grateful to be here today on this auspicious occasion. I want to thank Judge Tina Watson. Give her a big round of applause. Very important conversation. I want to really commend all the judges, all these black robes in the house. It used to be the only thing black in the Fort Bend County Courthouse was the robes or the defendants. Now we have these black and brown judges, so that's a great thing. So we've made some progress. And I want to thank you all for being here. Commissioner Preston, Judge George, all of these great speakers, Pam, bless you. Listen, this is a very important topic. And if any of you all have followed what's happened, and thank you for laying out that decision, it's really had a ripple effect. And I'm going to be brief, but I want to just give you the context of where we are. You know, voting rights made it possible for people like me to serve in public office. It was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Before that, they had poll taxes and literacy tests. They had many, many forms of voter suppression that kept people of color from voting, Beverly. That's just the way it was. There were so many impediments. And thank God for freedom fighters whose shoulders we stand on today that paved the way through sacrifices, through marching, through protesting, risking their lives. People of all races and faiths. It wasn't just African Americans, it was those freedom riders. Many of them were Jewish people. They were people of different faiths and ethnicities that came together as a country around the civil rights movement and demanded change. Because too many people have been lynched. Too many people have been disenfranchised because they couldn't have the right to vote. The right to vote is the most precious fundamental right we have as Americans. There are many other countries that don't have those rights, but the bedrock of our democracy is the right to vote. That's what makes America America, right? The land of the free. But that right was deprived of people who look like me for many, many, many years. And so we made progress. You know, I remember Fort Bend County, they had rights-only primaries. That was the way it was in Fort Bend County. It wasn't until we had those real heroes, you know, Fleming and Arizona Fleming and Willie Melton that fought and pushed and made sure that they ended that. They took it all the way up to the Supreme Court. That wasn't a long, long time ago. That was in the 1950s. So it wasn't a long time, y'all, that we had these rights that we enjoy today. So fast forward to where we are, the Texas legislature, where I have the privilege of serving. You know, last session, not this past session, but the session before that, Senate Bill 1 was debated. This bill was a solution in search of a problem. You know, Texas is one of the most difficult states to vote. I don't know if y'all know that, right? But that's not my words. Those are federal courts have held the last several redistricting that we racially discriminated against blacks. We did it again when we did the census last session, the session before that. But Senate Bill 1 was Jim Crow 2.0. That's why do I call it that? Because it made it harder for people of color to vote. You know, Judge George, when we had the pandemic, Fort Bend County was like Harris County. They implemented mobile voting. They implemented drive-through voting. There were some jurisdictions like Harris County that implemented 24-hour voting. Well, Senate Bill 1 eliminated counties' ability to do that. They took that away. It's no longer can you do that, no matter what. It could be COVID, another pandemic. Guess what? Fort Bend County, you can't do it because of Senate Bill 1. Why? Because it made it possible for too many people to vote. You may think, well, isn't that the point? You want people to vote? No, that's not the point. In Texas, many of my MAGA extremist colleagues want people to vote that likely vote Republican. That they made it more difficult to vote by mail because guess what? And I'm just going to be honest, Judge. Is it okay? Because too many Democrats started voting. The first thing they did after 2008, we had a record turnout. They implemented strict voter ID law in 2010, where it was 2011. But after Obama was elected in 2008, in the next session, we had the strictest voter ID law that was implemented, right? Where if you had an expired driver's license, then you couldn't vote. If you had a student with a college ID, they couldn't vote, right? They couldn't use that. Even if it was a state-issued ID, like Texas Southern or the University of Texas, sorry, you can't vote with this. Because too many students voted for Obama. Too many students voted Democrat. I was on the elections committee, and they just came up with stuff that made it more difficult. They said, this doesn't work. But if you have a concealed handgun license, yes, you can use that. That's okay. If you have a passport, that's okay, because you're a traveler. Yeah, you good. That was ridiculous. Then we made it more and more restricted. We kept chipping away with voting protections. And so many of my colleagues and I, we decided enough was enough. We're not going to let this happen on our watch. So we broke quorum. Y'all may remember the quorum break. The quorum break was because of Senate Bill 1. That's why we left Texas to go to D.C. We were begging the U.S. Congress to pass federal voting rights protection because the state of Texas, Pam, they wanted to disenfranchise people of color. They intentionally wanted to discriminate against black and brown people. That is the hardcore facts. That is the truth. That's the ugly truth. The state of Texas wanted to disenfranchise people. That's what Senate Bill 1 is. It's a voter suppression bill. Because they gutted certain sections of the Voting Rights Act, it is permissible now because Texas isn't under pre-clearance anymore. Texas used to be one of the states, because of the history of discrimination, that had to get pre-clearance from the court in D.C. or the Department of Justice. Those were the two ways you could get pre-clearance. This bill would have never passed pre-clearance, but because it's been gutted, because of the Shelby case, now they can do it. So we fought it. Long story short, Congress didn't pass it. They passed it in the House under Speaker Pelosi, and it died in the Senate because of the filibuster. And some of you may have known there were Senator Manchin and Senator Sinema who didn't want to break the filibuster, a relic of the Jim Crow past, to bring that up because it could have passed because we had a Democrat majority. Vice President Kamala Harris would have been the tie-breaking vote to pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Act and the Freedom to Vote Act. Those federal pieces of legislation would have made Senate Bill 1 null and void. But Senate Bill 1 is the law. But Judge Watson and I were there in San Antonio at the Western District Court because of the appeal. Because of the litigation brought by the Houston Area Urban League and any Deltas in the House, and the ladies of Delta Sigma Theta sorority. They championed this lawsuit to challenge the Governor Abbott for Senate Bill 1. And we were there for closing arguments. This was a 6-week trial that I'm hopeful that the state will lose the case. It will be overturned. I believe it's going to be overturned. I really do, Oscar. I believe that it's going to be overturned. The next challenge would go to the Fifth Circuit, and then likely all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. The basis of it is that it discriminated against people of color. There was so much evidence of it. So much evidence of it, y'all. There was evidence of discrimination against people with disabilities. That's why they had the ARC. They were there as a plaintiff as well, because it discriminates against people with disabilities. And so this case is currently waiting for a decision by the judge, but we know based on history that it's likely to end up at the U.S. Supreme Court. I'm not going to opine on how that's going to go. I mean, you all know the current composition of the U.S. Supreme Court. Until we get federal voting rights legislation reauthorized at the U.S. Congress, we are probably going to continue to see these type of discriminatory laws being passed in states like Texas that want to disenfranchise communities of color. Because based on the 2020 census, Texas is a majority minority state. They're very fearful of this diversity, right? That's why you may have saw, not to get off course, we ended DEI last session, because they want to get rid of that kind of stuff. They don't want to teach critical race theory. They don't want us knowing the history of the struggle of what's happened in this state, in this country. So I urge you to stay engaged, to make sure that you vote your values. Vote for people who are going to be fair on the bench, like these judges. Vote for people like Judge George and others who are making laws at the local level, ordinances to be fair and inclusive at the state level where I serve, at the state rep, the state senator, U.S. Congress. There's so many elections that impact our day-to-day lives that are critical for our future, for our democracy, and the hard-fought gains that we've made on the backs of those who paved the way. So thank you for pausing to reflect on how far we've come, but yet in so many ways, how far we still have to go to reach Dr. King's dream, where we would be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. Until we break down racial barriers, until we make it where every American can vote, we're failing people. Because in this state, it's easier to get a gun than it is to vote. I want you to think about that. It's easier to get a gun. You don't have to have a license anymore or a permit. We have permitless carry. It's harder to get a gun. It's harder to vote. It's harder to vote than to go get a gun. Even an assault rifle, right? Do y'all know that? We could get same-day registration. We don't have it. We could get online voter registration. We're one of the states that don't have that. During the pandemic, we did almost everything virtual and online. But in the state of Texas, we can't register to vote online. You know why? Because the voter registration would go exponentially up. It would make it too accessible. That is anti-democratic. That is anti what we should be doing. So I urge you all to make sure that you don't fall asleep at the wheel and you continue to stay engaged and understand that our freedoms are under attack. And if we don't rise up, then we're going to go back to dark days that we've overcome. Thank you.
Our next speaker will share with you her experience in voting today. And she is a person that used the ballot by mail process, which many of our over 65-year-old citizens take advantage of. I cannot do her resume enough justice. I'm not going to try, but I will tell you Ms. Pam Gaskin has been active for probably all of her life due to her parents, her siblings, and everyone surrounding her family have all been active in these movements. Beyond what she says, and she's probably going to be modest about it, Ms. Pam Gaskin is a graduate of, what's that little school in Austin? University of Texas. And I say that because she is educated, articulate, and for her to have the amount of confusion and voting with everything she brings to the table, including she does work with the League of Women Voters, is just an example of how difficult voting has become in this process. Ms. Pam Gaskin.
celebrate this momentous occasion. Is that better? Yes. I'm going to give you a number, and I just want you to hold it in your head. This is not a cognition test, but the number is 14%. Just hold on to that, and I'll tell you what it means at the end. When I entered the University of Texas in 1965, the Voting Rights Act had just been signed 3 weeks before. So I entered the University of Texas, and I had a right to vote. I watched my parents pay poll tax in Galveston County. And I told Ms. Jones, you know, we didn't have a whole lot, but we shared what we had. And my parents paid poll tax for almost everybody on our block. Poll tax was $2. A loaf of bread cost 19 cents back in 19. So that's a big sacrifice. That's a big sacrifice. Anyway, so hold on to that 14% number. And here we are. We're in the third decade of the 21st century. In 2021, the Texas legislature passed laws that have the effect, as Ron has told you, of making it more confusing for the very few citizens who are eligible to vote by mail. Now, and I say very few because you have to be over 65. You have to be incarcerated but not convicted. You have to be disabled. Those are the only folks who can vote by mail. The only people. And you have to, if you're over 65, you have to request, well, if you're in any of those categories, you have to request every year in January. You have to fill out an application. Now, mind you, we are already registered voters. The county has a jacket with my name and my voting information in it. But every year I have to apply for a ballot by mail. So, you know, I did that in 2022 after they passed this legislation in 21. And strange thing happened. The first thing was that the county didn't have the right application form on the website. So I pulled out the form, I filled it out, I mailed it in for me and my husband. And a few weeks later, I got a letter that said, through no fault of yours, your application has been denied. So I called, and I have been a voter registrar in this county for 40 years. I know everybody at the elections office. There are people at the elections office who are there now who weren't even there when I started registering voters. So I called and I said, hey, why did I get rejected? Oh, it was the wrong form. We had the wrong form on file. So fill it out. Now, I said, okay. I said, is the right form up there now? Yes. I filled it out, mailed it in. Got a letter. You've been rejected. I called. What's wrong? Well, you didn't put the right ID on your application. I said, and what ID would that be? Well, the one that you used when you first registered to vote in this county. So I've been living in this county 45 years. I can't tell you what I had for breakfast yesterday. I don't know what form of ID I used. But since I went to the University of Texas and I have a degree in English and I know how to read and follow directions, I'm going to make a deduction here. Then since you only asked for two things, and I know you say that I have to provide one of the two, my driver's license or the last 4 digits of my social security number. So I put my driver's license on. The next line says, if you do not have a driver's license. Well, I had a driver's license. So, you know, my stuff is supposed to go through. But I put the driver's license on, so obviously that was wrong. So deductive reasoning tells you that what? I should have put the last 4 digits of my social security number. So I pulled out the form again, and I did it, and I said, okay, there will not be a blank on this application. There will be something in it, because I'm determined. What bothers me is that I met and talked to many people my age who are not computer literate. They don't have the fight in them. They say, well, maybe the Lord didn't need to vote. And and that happens. But that is disenfranchisement. So this is my story. This is my story. And Ron, you'll be happy to know I am a plaintiff in the SB1 lawsuit. And my part was on the ballot by mail. So, as a lifelong voter, and believe me, I have been voting more years than I care. I guess I turned 21 in 1968, and you had to be 21 to vote back then. So I'm 77, so do the math, and I've been voting that long. I've only missed voting in 2 elections. One, I was having a baby, couldn't get to the polls, and because I was too young to vote by mail. Okay, but now you can, if you think you're gonna have a baby, you can vote. You can apply to vote by mail. Anyway, but I'm a lifelong voter, and the reject rate in 2022 was 25%. So 25% of the people who applied to vote by mail, their applications got rejected. That's pretty high. So this pending legal action that's going on hopefully will resolve some of this, because they had the effect of suppressing the votes of seniors, disabled, and people who are incarcerated but not finally convicted. Because that's a whole other story about, our cash bail and all these folks in the back rows that we're talking about. But the struggle does continue, and here's how the struggle continues. I asked you to hold on to 14%. In the election that we had in November, which was a midterm election, in November of 2022, was a midterm election. Then last year we had the state constitutional election. 14% of registered voters voted. 14%. 14%. When it takes 50% plus 1 to do anything, what that tells you is that 7.5% or 8% of the people who are registered to vote decided what 100% of us have to live under. Now, is that math that works for you? Because it doesn't work for me. It does not work for me. So the struggle continues, and each one of us has to continue to do our small part. Everybody can't do everything, but everybody can do something. If you do nothing but go down and get approved to register voters, and you just decide that if anybody moves in on your street, you're going to take them a voter registration form and say, hey, you moved, you need to change your voting. Do that. Make sure that your children, your grandchildren, your family, make sure that not only do they register to vote, but that they vote. Because we got 17 million registered voters in Texas. 2.5 million voted in November, in the November election. Not good. Please, the struggle continues. Let's do it, people. We got to do this. Thank you.
Okay, understanding this is the lunch hour, I want to talk about our sponsors, and we have a reception with food later, and we're getting close to the end. Thank you, Yasmin Cuddy Law Firm, Azar Chartery Law Firm, for helping us make this a very special occasion. And again, I invite you after the Judge K.P. George's office as well for the food, cake, and refreshments. Now, I would like to leave us with the remarks and closing remarks of our County Judge, K.P. George.
That means I'm the one standing between the lunch and you. Let's make it quick. And absolutely it is an honor, like I said before. Thank you very much for the Fort Bend County Judiciary for being committed to telling the untold story and the stories of African American struggles in Fort Bend County as far as voting is concerned. And I wanted to say this, you heard a lot about struggles and you heard a lot about what happened in the past, but don't forget, in that there's a lot of triumphs attached to today. And I'm just sitting there and thinking, talking about triumphs. Until 2018, in Fort Bend County, there was 3 African American elected officials. Right, Commissioner? You were the only 3. Commissioner Prestige, Judge Clauser, and Reuben Davis Constable. And today, out of 28 elected positions in Fort Bend County, 19 of them are minority And the impact is, you need to understand, we hire people who look like you. And my chief of staff is sitting here, Shanika Smith. And she happened to be an African American. And we have communication director sitting here, Tammy Frazier. She is also, when last I looked at her, so African American. So we came a long way. We did. But the problem is, as you heard from Ron, absolutely we haven't done yet. And we have a lot to do. And absolutely, just this thing briefly, I wanted to say this. But we have hope. And also Mahatma Gandhi said, be that change. You need to change. America, I say this all the time, America is no way a finished product. We are making changes and we will make changes. And things changed in this county, things changed in the state, and things changed in the country. So we will continue to fight. There is no question about it. And so, one of the ways we fight is investing and promoting our young people. And they are our future. And I just want to say this is the 3rd year we started doing a Black History essay competition in Fort Bend County. Elementary, middle, high school level students participated in it. We have 3 winners today joining us. The first, hold on one second. You need to celebrate this. Elementary school first place winner, Justin Wen. Can you please stand up? So I know that you have a essay, and can we send this due to lack of time? Can we send this to all these participants? Because I don't know we have enough time to read all that. Right? And unfortunately, like I said, unfortunately we don't have enough time. And so, I will bring you back. I promise you. And I don't lose this. And I will bring you back. We wanted to hear this. But at the same time, I wanted to give you a certificate of recognition today. And if somebody is taking a picture, please come. Thank you so much, and don't lose this. We want it. Okay? Thank you. Thank you. And middle school first place winner is Omayemi Ihale. I hope I am pronouncing the name correct. We wanted to give you a certificate of recognition. And also our first place winner in the high school area is Alvina Tara. Really appreciate it. Very good. Here we go. Thank you. definitely need to listen to their essay for sure. We like to get a copy of it, and we can, maybe in the future events, maybe we could invite you one by one so that you could read your essay. But in closing, I just wanted to say, you heard the timeline, you heard the story, and you understood what is going on. And we came a long way, but we have a long way to go. And I just wanted to thank the judiciary, Dr. Watson, and Judge. That's what happens when you don't eat on time, I guess. And so Judge Carter and all judges here, and thank you. This is a commendable work you did. And I wish we had more people here. We need to bring more people next time, because a lot of these stories, a lot of people look like us doesn't know. And so it is important these stories are told, and thank you for all the elected officials joining us. And I just wanted to say, our job collectively to make Fort Bend County, state of Texas, our country a better place for our children and generations to come. And that's how you do it, by voting and promoting voting and going and telling the story of the struggles. And I said this last time, we are standing on the shoulders of these people, everybody's name just mentioned, absolutely. As a brown person standing on their shoulders, they didn't think people like me, they will be leading me into these things, but they did. And so we want to continue to work so that we can have a better county, better state, and better country. Thank you so much for joining us.